What you know, alibis. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. We're going to finish up the last episode in the documentary Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke. I have to tell you guys, watching this a second time and making notes and stopping and starting, it's even more disturbing than the first. The last episode is titled Truth, and it opens with police banging on Jody's door. She's on the phone with her attorney, and they tell her to step out of the house. She says she's not, so they grab her wrists and bring her out. The director says to Kevin, we should probably talk about what Jody and Ruby did to the kids after you moved out. They go back to Ruby ringing a bell in the house, and she tells the last four kids that are left there to come down the stairs. She is directing the kids, keep coming. And one of the neighbors said Chad and Kevin are gone, and that only leaves Ruby to care for these kids, and they started to get worried. They play audio of Ruby saying, what I say is often really difficult for people to hear. And what I'm suggesting is your woke child is a walking zombie, and you have the opportunity to wake the zombie up. They show comments from viewers. How has it come to this? They're giving me culty vibes. Ruby's in the kitchen with her three younger daughters, and they're watching Jody on a laptop. Ruby, again, is directing her kids, telling them to step forward, a little more. There you go, right there. Jody is on screen saying you have hurt, fear, resentment, and feelings of being entitled. Neighbor Lisa McLean says they were once bubbly children, but now they're withdrawn and it seems like there's no joy. They show videos of the kids cleaning the house, taking out the trash. And one day, Ruby was in her front yard, and her neighbor, Matthew McLean, said he asked, why did Kevin and Chad leave? Ruby told him every marriage should have a separation. It could be a year or 5. Sydney Condi said they knew something was wrong. They were hoping maybe Kevin would come home and either remedy the situation or get the kids away from what they felt was a dangerous situation. Real-time Kevin says that going into the non-contact separation was terrifying. He was terrified he was going to lose his marriage or that Ruby would ask for a divorce. And he said by that point, he was 1,000% compliant. He was going to support Ruby over all of his kids. And somehow he had to convince Jody he was ready to go back to Ruby. They show Kevin on a group session with 5 other men. And Jody is saying, you have to be willing to make choices that are grounded in truth. Just focus on not being selfish in any form tomorrow. Kevin said it was radio silence from any and everybody except for the weekly men's group, and he shifted to being a hermit. Chad said that he moved right outside the local university. Jody is heard saying you're anxious, depressed, addicted. And Chad said the calls with Jody were still going on once a week, even after he got kicked out. Jody continues, there's selfishness, greed, porn, lust, manipulation, lying, hiding, and there's secrets. Chad said at this point, Jody just had a control on him because he learned to love and trust her. All he wanted to do after moving out was to make Ruby and Jody proud and to show them that he was changing. Shari was at BYU, and she says after a month, she texted Kevin from college. She loved and missed him. He hearted that message, and then he unhearted it. She thought, pull your head out of your butt and come back. She was blocked after that, so she stopped sending messages. The director asked Kevin, why didn't you stand up and say, this is nonsense? Kevin says if he dwells on that question, it eats him alive. Their neighbor, Lisa, said it was very clear that Kevin wasn't coming back, and she was getting uncomfortable with every video that was coming out. It was getting worse, it was very harsh, and there was no compassion. They show a video of Ruby and Jody, and Ruby says she loves principals more than she loves her child. Jody smiles and says, yikes. But Ruby says that's the truth. Ruby is seen in a selfie video saying, don't let the child control and dictate what goes on. They show some more comments from viewers. Wow, Ruby is completely gone off the rails. Gonna see Ruby on a true crime podcast. That viewer wasn't wrong. Lisa said they started seeing less of Ruby in the neighborhood and more of her being filmed in St. George, which is 4 hours away. Ruby's on camera saying we are beyond band-aids and we're beyond putting a little bit of ointment on the wounds. Sydney Condi said Ruby's car would be gone for days and the kids were home alone. She said there were little faces peering out of the window when you walked by, and they would still be there hours later when you walked by again. Sydney would text Shari often asking how she was doing. Shari said she was getting kind of nervous, and Lisa said, I can see why. They show a video outside the Springville police station September 18th, 2022, and they play a 911 call from Shari. She tells dispatch her 4 younger siblings are living in Springville, and her neighbors told her they've been left home alone, and she wanted to see if someone could go check on them. Dispatch asks her if she's spoken with her parents, and Shari says they've cut her off and they're not on speaking terms. Dispatch says that she can let Shari talk to an officer. Sydney said she got a text from their neighbor Lisa asking if she was home. She was, and Lisa told her that Shari called the police for a welfare check and says they need more witnesses and asked if she could come talk to the police. They show a group of neighbors on the street talking with police. I counted just 8 from what was visible. She said nobody would answer the door. They show some surveillance from that house of neighbors walking to the front door. Lisa said the police couldn't just go in. They would need a warrant, and the officer said a judge would not sign off on it. Grant, who is a next door neighbor to the Frankes, texted Kevin, "You have 4 cop cars outside your house, FYI. Hope things are okay. What's going on?" And he got no response. Matt McLean texted Kevin, "You can't abandon your family," but Matt was blocked, and that shocked him. Grant says that Kevin's totally brainwashed at this point. He's just gone. Their intuition is going nuts. They're putting out the culty videos. Ruby's neglecting her kids, and the kids are quiet and evasive. They show Ruby on a video saying, if your kid came to you on fire, you throw them on the ground and you start rolling them. They're going to say, you're hurting me, you're beating me, you're controlling. But it's like, no, dear, hold still. I'm getting the fire out. Again, they show comments from viewers. Get out of there now. Straight up child abuse. And can we report this to anyone? Lisa said there were so many of their neighbors that contacted the Division of Children and Family Services. And neighbor Kristen Collard said they asked her if she saw any signs of abuse, and she said no. She didn't see any signs of physical abuse. But the person said they needed to see some physical evidence for them to be able to step in. Shari got a call from the caseworker who apologized and said they needed to close the case. She told Shari personally she was really concerned, but there was nothing they could do. Kristen said from that point, she never saw the kids play outside again. Ruby is on video saying, you need to get a surgical knife and put the kid out and surgically go in and find the infection. Kristen gets emotional and says she realized she should have lied and told them the kids were being harmed and that she could see it. She regrets not saying that. She wishes she had lied. They jump ahead 10 months later in St. George, Utah, August 30th, 2023. They show the surveillance of the youngest son going to Jody's neighbor's house. When the man comes out, the boy says, I was wondering if you could do me 2 favors. Take me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine. The man asks what's going on, and the boy says it's personal business, and the man tells the child to have a seat. They play that 911 call, and he's emotional. He said he had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. He's emaciated. He has duct tape around each ankle, and he's hungry and thirsty. He said he just left through the porch at Jody's house. They show from the ring cam video a woman is outside at this point with the man who is on the phone with 911, and the boy is sitting. The woman is pacing, and she says, we need the police here now. The man tells dispatch the neighbor's name is Jody Hildebrandt, and she lives 2 doors up the street. He continues, this boy has been, and he starts crying. This kid has obviously been detained, and he's obviously covered in wounds. If you've never seen an overhead of where Jody lived, these houses are not like subdivisions, one right after the other. There's definitely some property separating all these houses. They're not close at all. 11:01 a.m., they show body cam footage of police arriving to Jody's. And Sergeant Nick Tobler with the Santa Clara Ivans Police said he heard over the radio there's a young boy that showed up to a house and he had duct tape on his ankles and wrists. So I'm going to give a trigger warning here. I know this is very disturbing and sensitive stuff. We are going to get into some of the wounds here. I'm not going to show them on screen, but I am going to describe what was in the documentary. So if you are sensitive to that stuff, you may want to skip towards the end. They show photos of the young man's ankles and wrists. There is saran wrap around these wounds. You see the cayenne pepper they were putting on the open sores underneath that saran wrap. And then on top of that is duct tape wrapped tightly all the way around. And it's very clear to see he is severely malnourished. The ambulance was already there and it was backed into the driveway. Sergeant Tobler got his camera out from his car. He wanted to take a few photos before they left with the boy. They show his body cam from where the boy is in the ambulance and he gets up in there. Detective Jessica Bates said her first impression was how extremely emaciated he was. He was just skin and bones. She could see the tendons on the upper part of his ankle in the Achilles tendon area, front and back, and she had never seen anything like that before. They show blurred photos of the wounds. Now, I've seen the uncensored ones, and they are horrific. These are not small wounds, and it looks like these could have went down to the bone because there was no fat on this child. He said he had been tied up. He had handcuffs on him. He also said he had a younger sister who was in the home, but he had not seen her in over a month. He had heard her, but he said they had been kept separate. Police decide to sweep the house to try to find any other children that might be inside. They show them knocking again on the door, and Jody answers. They tell her to step outside, and she says she's not. So they pull her by her wrists, and Jody goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa." And they tell her they're going to see if anybody else is home. Jody yells, "How do you come in my house?" And then she's on the phone with her attorney, and she tells her attorney, "They're going into my house." She asks if they have a search warrant, and they're telling her to have a seat. She asks, "But don't you have to have a warrant?" And the officer says, "Not at this moment, we don't." They show body cam of the police going through the home. They look in doors and closets, and they're just working their way through. Downstairs, there's a basement. It's all concrete from the floors to the walls to the ceiling. And they found a door that looked like a safe. The officer goes outside and asks Jody, how did they get access to that to ensure nobody else is in the home? Jody says she doesn't know if she has the code. And the officer asks if it's a panic room. And Jody said it's a room with a toilet and a sink. He asks her again if she knows the code, and Jody said she hasn't used it. They clear a bedroom and a bathroom upstairs, and he hears Sergeant Hallman talking to someone. Sergeant Tobler is outside of a door, and he says, "Hi, I'm a police officer. Are you okay?" You see a room that is barely lit and a very, very skinny girl sitting on the floor. He introduces himself and asks her name, but she doesn't respond to any of the questions. He said the girl looked like a young boy sitting there because her head was shaved. She was really skinny and she didn't talk. And she looked scared. He asks if she's okay, if she's scared, and nothing. He tells her he's not there to hurt her. He just wants to make sure she's okay. He said he gets if she's scared, and he says he would be too. He said after seeing the two kids in a bad situation, it's just hard not to personalize it. He started to get choked up, so Sergeant Hallman continued to clear the room, and Tobler says, "I'm just going to stay here." But on camera, he says, "What kind of person does this to these two children?" Shari says she doesn't remember much about that day. It's really a blur. Over in Springville, Utah, Real-Time Kevin said he had no communication with the family for over a year. And all of a sudden, his phone rings, and it's Ruby. It shows her name with a red heart beside it. So he answered it. He said he was so emotional because for the first time in over a year, he was having a conversation with the woman he loved, his wife. He said she was talking to me again. She was in a panic and said, I have some explaining to do. So she started to explain to Kevin that the two youngest children were possessed by demons. He asked, how do you know this? And she said the children have confessed to it. One of the younger kids got out and got to the police. And I can only imagine the lies he's telling the police right now. She tells Kevin he needs to go pick up their children from the police station. This is your chance to redeem yourself. So he was going to go get the kids and bring them back home. 2:28 p.m. at Jody's house, they show police going into the home again because the only place that had not been accounted for was that safe room downstairs. Well, their lieutenant was just messing around with the code and he said, I'm going to try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it worked. They go in and they find rope and handcuffs in a bottom drawer. What's interesting is you see in this drawer, there are books lined up, and one of the titles is Codependency and Caretaking. You see kids' clothing folded on the counter. They find medical gauze. And the boy had told them about cayenne pepper and honey paste that they were putting on his wounds. They found a container of that. They found duct tape, and you see a trash can. And inside and outside that trash can, there's old discarded saran wrap. And you see that red cayenne pepper honey paste on them. At that point, they knew there were two middle daughters who were unaccounted for. They had other agencies throughout the state looking for them. They show police at the Franke home saying, Ruby, it's the police. Open the door now. They bust in the door, but nobody was home. The girls were found at a friend of Ruby's house close to the Franke home. They were physically fine. And at that point, Ruby was the one who police wanted to talk to. The detective explains they were searching the house, and out of nowhere, Ruby pulls up. At 5:24 p.m., they show body cam footage of Ruby sitting on a couch at Jody's, and the officer says she's already been detained, but tells Ruby she'll be taking her to the police department. She has Ruby stand up and put her hands behind her back. They show her getting cuffed. Ruby didn't ask any questions or how the kids were doing. Ruby is just blankly staring at this officer in a way that looks like a trance. The first time I ever saw this, I honestly wondered if she was on drugs, but I guess not. They also show her being put into the police car. 5:50 p.m., Kevin says he went straight to the police department and told the receptionist, I'm Kevin Franke, and I'm here to pick up my two children. I understand they're here waiting for me. She says, oh, okay, a couple of officers have your children, and they want to speak with you about some things. So they show Kevin in the interview room, and they read him his Miranda rights. The detective says she wants to ask a few questions about his involvement. And Kevin said he was thinking to himself, he wants to get his kids and he wants to go. He really thought he would just pick them up. She asks how many kids he has, and he tells her 6. They ask if they live with him, and he says, no, I haven't seen them for over a year. And she says, any of them? And he says, no. The detective said she remembered thinking, this is crazy for a dad to not have seen his kids in over a year. Kevin said he was very suspicious, nervous, and terrified because in his mind, they were the wolves wanting to tear his family apart. Another officer asked how he knew to come there, and Kevin said he received a message that he needed to come pick up his kids. Now, they asked him, who sent you the message? And Kevin said he preferred not to say who. Real-time Kevin said he was afraid to do anything that would point them towards Ruby because he was trying to protect her. Kevin is told at the police station that sometime before 11 today, they got a 911 call that a 12 or 13-year-old boy was knocking on doors in the neighborhood asking for food and water. He was severely emaciated, which Kevin asked what that word meant. And the officer said skinny, malnourished, not enough food or water to sustain life. Kevin says, excuse me, what? The officer tells Kevin the child had duct tape on his extremities, and those were covering rope burns that were used to tie him down. Kevin said he couldn't comprehend it, he couldn't understand it, and it didn't make sense to him. Real-time Kevin said he truly believed they were lying to him. They offered to show him photos, but he refused because he didn't want to be manipulated. They show Kevin in the interview room and he says, "You realize I have a picture of my family on my wall and I look at it every day." He slams his hand down on the table and says, "I work every day so I can get back to my family to save my family. Everything you're sharing with me sounds like a made up story. I have no idea what you're talking about." Real time Kevin says he didn't know what to do and he was just lost. In the interview room, Kevin says, "I just want my kids back. I want my family back. I want my wife back." The detective says going into the interview, she wanted to find out more about the dynamic, what led to this. And then she just heard, "I support my wife. I support Jody and her teachings, and I haven't seen my kids in over a year." She told Kevin, "It's not really helpful, but you're not really a suspect anymore at this point." They go to Ruby in the interview room. Detective Bate and Sergeant Tobler are in with her, and she just stares blankly. They tell Ruby they want to talk about her kids. They ask if she lives there, and Detective Bate said she said nothing, just long blinks. She thought this was the most awkward interview of her life. She tells Ruby, "I can wait all day if you want to talk about what's going on." And Ruby says, "I'll wait until I have a lawyer." They go to Jody in the interview room, and her attorney said, "Don't say anything." Jody tells the investigator she has nothing to hide. "You seem nice. I'd like to just tell you, but I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're going to twist my words." Detective Bates said that's the good thing about cameras. It's double recorded audio and video. Jody says she's watched people flip things all the time, so she gets it. "I sit on your side. I get it. I wish people didn't do that, but they do." And Detective Bate nails it and says she was clearly trying to manipulate us in that moment. Chad said at this point he had no contact with Ruby and he was isolated for a whole year. He was at work as a lifeguard and his boss came up to him and said, "I'm sorry, it's all over the news. If you need anything, let us know." But Chad had no idea what was going on. When it was time for his break, he searched Ruby Franke today, and there it was. They show a montage of news coverage about the arrests and the abuse. Chad said he was being fed all this information, and his thought process was this isn't real. And he really believed this had to be a setup. He believed Jody and Ruby were God's chosen people, that we were in the last days and the prison walls would break open and Ruby and Jody would be standing with God. Detective Bates said they met with both of the young kids for their second interview. And at this point, the young boy was very forthcoming with information. He told about being forced to stand in the sun all day, being tied down to weights, forced to jump on a trampoline all day, and they show a worn spot on the trampoline in a crime scene photo. He mentioned going to Hell Hole Road in the middle of the desert and says they were forced to run. This is a road that just seems to go on forever. They were able to go back into Jody's a second time for a search. The investigator, she went into the room where the boy was staying with Ruby and saw a blue folder on the nightstand. And she said, "This is everything." Ruby wrote everything down. And they go on to quote some of the things they found. "He is to stay outside, sleep outside, shaved her head. She was doused with water, put my hand tightly over his nose and mouth, head in the toilet. I will not feed a demon, blood on his face, scream and scream." And Detective Bates said they were shocked. In an entry, July 10th, 2023, "I told the boy he emulates a snake. If he wants to emulate the Savior, he needs to be 100% obedient with exactness. The body must engage in good work, and the good work needs to be painful. I have the power of God, and he must obey." And there's some other words: soul killing and infection. Back to Brandon, who used to work with Jody. He said in the journal, "You can see Ruby believes her children are possessed. In the LDS religion, there is a belief that no unclean thing can enter the kingdom of God. So her anxiety about being righteous and getting to a certain place in heaven allowed her to abuse her children. They read from Ruby's journal. I push him into the sun. He comes back. I come back with a cactus poker. When I poke him in the back to get in the sun, he doesn't even flinch. I told him, give your demon friend a message for me. I will not rest. I will not stop. I will not leave. I will fight him until the day you die. Detective Bates said there's absolutely no doubt what that young boy did that day saved both his and his sister's lives. Real-time Chad said he tried to call Jody, no response. And even though it was a big no-no, he tried to call Ruby, no response. He did the impossible and unthinkable and sent a message to his dad, who he hadn't messaged in over a year. The message said, Dad, this is Chad. I have no one to go to. Everyone is arrested. Kevin responded that he was going to the house that evening to check on it and told Chad he was welcome to come. Later on, when Chad pulls up to the house, he sees a man in the front yard and he thought, who is that? The man stands up and it was this skinny, scrawny man. Kevin said Chad looked much older. Chad asked, what's going on? What's all this I'm hearing about? Kevin told him about the kids being under the influence of evil spirits and the things they were reportedly doing. Real-time Chad said it's hard for him to say this, but he accepted the abuse as something that was truthful. Ruby explained it to Kevin in a way that Kevin explained it to him, that it was the right thing to do. Kevin says when he walked in the house for the first time in over a year, it was just a mess, and they show video of this. Things were littered all over the floor. There were bins and buckets everywhere, and all the drawers were empty. His mind was racing, and the things he was believing weren't compatible with all of the facts in front of him. Their neighbor Matt walks in, and Kevin is sitting on the ottoman with his head down. Kevin stood up and hugged Matt and started sobbing. He apologized for the mess, and Matt told him they were packing up and moving. Kevin says, no, where? Why? This is their home. This is where they live. Matt started to explain things, but Kevin told him to stop and said he needed to talk. Matt said they talked for 6 hours. And Kevin says at this point, he started asking questions for the first time. Did Ruby move to St. George? True or false? True. What was going on at my house? Lisa said Kevin would grab his head and cry, and he was angry and said he felt like he was going crazy. Nothing made sense, and everything has been a lie. Matt says Kevin realized for the first time he had been brainwashed. Real-time Kevin says all of a sudden 2 + 2 = 4, and things made sense. Chad said that Kevin told him, we've been lied to this whole time. No child is possessed. No child did the things your mom said they did. Kevin and Chad hugged, and Kevin sobbed. Chad remembers thinking everything you've been told is a lie, and he realized he couldn't defend his mother anymore. Kevin said little by little he was starting to accept the idea that Ruby and Jody had done something awful. He feels angry when he thinks about it, and he feels guilty. He said he was the last line of defense for these children, and I packed my bags and walked away. They jump ahead 4 months later to Jody's plea hearing. Pleaded guilty to all charges. And Ruby's friend Paige said Jody convinced Ruby there was a cause worth fighting. And in that process, Ruby's cause came to rid her kids of evil when there was never any evil to eliminate. If you guys remember Shari's teacher, her husband Ruel said he thinks Jody received a lot of satisfaction taking revenge on anyone who was happy. Teresa said Jody was very gifted. She was getting people to believe things that don't make sense, but yet they believed her. They show Jody talking to the camera, and she says, if you're like me, you've had pain in your life, and connections is the solution. They show Ruby at the hearing where she pleaded guilty. Kevin said he found it hard to look at Ruby, so he just chose not to. To hear this woman I worshiped admit to destroying our family, that hurt. Ruby pleaded guilty to another charge, and she says, with my deepest regret and sorrow for my family and my children. Chad said it was heartbreaking to see her in ankle chains and handcuffs. Shari said before she went to the sentencing, she didn't want to look at Ruby, so she looked at the judge the whole time. They show Ruby at the hearing and she's crying and says, "To my babies, I can see now how over the past 4 years I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger. I was so disoriented that I believed dark was light and right was wrong." Shari says she has seen too many crocodile tears from Ruby and really can't say if she's truly sorry or not. On screen, it says that Ruby and Jody pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse and will serve up to 30 years in prison each. They go back to that video of the gender reveal with the cake that was shown in that first episode. It's a girl. Shari is watching this in real time on a tablet. She said she would never talk to Ruby again, even if she's the most apologetic person in the world. It doesn't change anything for her. They had one childhood and one mom, and that was hers. They show videos of happier times. In real time, Chad said he misses a mother figure and how Ruby was when he was young, but what she's going through is deserved. And he doesn't think she should be released at least until all kids turn 18. It doesn't mean he doesn't have love for her. Kevin said he still loves Ruby and always has. The director asks, even though she abused the kids, and he says, "Oh, yeah." The actions were atrocious, but he feels a longing and he misses her. He says all the delivery rooms, the moments holding their children, it's easy for the world to hate her and they want me to join in, but I can't turn off all the other memories. They show the clip of Ruby. She says, "This is heaven. I live for being with my kids in the kitchen, eating good food." The director asked Kevin, "How do you make sense of what's happened?" Kevin says, "This is really a story of love, hope, of family, but it's also a story of deception, control, and ultimately, it's a story of faith. If you put your faith in the wrong hands, you can lose everything." They show the video of Ruby with that jar of marbles, and she says, "Thanks, you guys. Happy scheduling." At the end, they say Chad has built his own following as a social media influencer. Shari is campaigning against family vlogging, and Kevin has filed for divorce. Jody and Ruby did not respond to a request for comment, and that was the end. I really hope that those kids are in a much better place now, although no doubt the scars of everything all 6 of them went throughout this time period will be something that will affect them for the rest of their lives. Well, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me while we recap this documentary. I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.